Deputy Kelly.
You can't call it. I'm glad to be in a position to speak on this bill this evening. Count Corley will be delighted to know that I'll stick to the bill. We have other opportunities to deal with many of the serious issues that have been raised by previous speakers in the next 24 hours, and they are very serious issues. This is a very important piece of legislation. It's a concise piece of legislation that the government was bounced into producing because of two things: because of the Sláintecare report, which myself and indeed Deputy O'Reilly sat on for 11 months under the chairmanship of Russian Shortall, and it recommended this. But I think, as somebody who's into the detail in relation to the cervical cancer debacle and scandal, it was quite obvious that as a result of what many of us saw transpire at that time in here, in the Public Accounts Committee and the Health Committee, of which I'm both on, when you spoke to and questioned the HSE and the Department of Health officials, it was quite obvious that governance had collapsed and that the need for an independent board was absolutely necessary. And that's, of course, what was recommended in Sláintecare, and the greatest example of why it was needed was right now before our eyes in the cervical cancer situation. I'll say it straight out, I believe the decision to abolish the board in 2012 was foolish. The structures that were supposedly to be put in place never even materialised. And I look back at the cervical cancer debacle, and I look back at some of the committee hearings. I can't remember whether it was a Public Accounts or Health Committee, but probably both. But I remember questioning accountability and how this could happen. And I remember very specifically, and this is an important point, actually the National Screening Programme, which had been quite a successful programme, but where it actually had fallen down into the organisational structure, the tree, for want of a better word, of the HSE, and the history of how it had fallen down off the top tier of actual management and directorate in the HSE, where it had been part of the top tier a number of years ago, because a directorate, a number of directors working together were making decisions in a vacuum away from accountability to a board or to anyone. It had actually slipped off the top tier, gone down, and in many ways was down 2 tiers. And as a result, the director in charge of it hadn't a clue what was going on. It was quite obvious. At a management level, the directors speaking together at the directorate meetings obviously were raising the issue, and it was being discussed as screening programmes. But the issue of this audit, which we all know about now, never really reached the top table, never really got up. No one was asking questions. And it was also merged, screening was also merged to be part of a whole directorate in relation to wellness. So I got mixed up in all of that good stuff, which, it's very positive stuff to be out in the media, very positive stuff to be out in the public about, and very important stuff. But this is a very specific area. And because of a lack of oversight, because of management structures that were actually decided by the HSE directorate themselves, and there's an element of need for doing that, I accept, but because there was a lack of oversight, there was no board to actually say, well, is that working, how is it working? From time to time, do we not need to look at this? And all of that sort of stuff that is necessary where boards are in place and independent to challenge a CEO, to challenge the lead management team, the directors in this case. It wasn't there. It didn't happen. And because of that, it didn't float all the way up to the top, the issues that we're going through. And only for Vicky Phelan, we wouldn't have known. And everyone in this House knows that. So if there's an encapsulation of how a structure that was devolved by directors themselves, the CEO, who was, to be fair and to be balanced, was left in this situation, so I'm not going to criticise him for that, whereby there was a tier of directors and a CEO without an accountable board. If there's ever an example, that is it. For a 17+ billion organisation with the largest employees of any state company in Ireland. So this bill is incredibly important. It's a small bill, but it's incredibly important to ensure good governance, accountability and transparency. And obviously it's in tandem with other legislation going to be going through the Houses, and particularly in the whole area of open disclosure. So we also need the new chair-designate, and I wish him the best, and the new CEO, whoever that is, if, Minister, we can find one. It's proven quite difficult at the moment to find one. One of the things that will have to happen in tandem is the whole psychological changeover in the HSE as regards open disclosure and basically honesty and transparency and how to deal with the public. All has to happen in tandem. The independent board and the governance that will be put in place isn't going to happen overnight. I think it's the board will be put in place, but the actual process by which they'll do their work will have to be overseen quite tightly, I believe, by the Minister and by the Department. Obviously, the type of people that are put on this board, we need to be very careful about. By the way, it's not that easy to get people onto boards anymore. It's an incredibly difficult thing, so we need to ensure we get the right people across all the disciplines that are listed out in this, and the Minister has made reference to previously. I want to say I welcome the fact that the Minister has changed and added in 2 patient advocates. That's a very positive thing, and obviously Scally has referenced that as well. But I want to be clear about one thing here. This has to happen, particularly in healthcare, but potentially in other boards as well. They're going to have to be reimbursed. And I don't mean travel and expenses. I mean fully reimbursed for the loss of pay, because otherwise you're not going to get a proper cross-section of society. And please, please, I've raised this now half a dozen times. You look at the type of people we need to get on these boards. We don't want, and there's nothing wrong with one, but we don't want 2 retirees who can afford financially. We also need people with real-life experiences who've been through a lot. If you look at the whole issue of a cervical check, Ceann Corley, and the issues there, majority of the families affected have women who are young. Now, the best patient advocate there in relation to a topic like that, and cancer in general, obviously could come from that sector. But one of those people will not be able to go on the board because they will not be able to afford to. They will not be able to afford to give up the time from their job. And I know this from the groups that has been set up with the HSE in relation to cervical check already. And some of the people who are actually giving up their time on that, really long-term will not be able to continue doing that because they have jobs to go to and they have children to feed, and they can't afford the loss of income. So please, Minister, if there's one small point, bear that in mind. I think it's something across government and across politics that we need to ensure. The new board, the new chair designate needs to set a new tone which I believe, dare I say it, from an accountability point of view, Oireachtas committees have had to fill a void because of the fact there wasn't accountability at the level of a board there already. So the new board and the new chair designate set a tone as regards how they make the management structure and the management team accountable. Because actually what's happening at the moment is, because that's not there, myself and others in the 2 committees particularly that I've referenced already are actually going into a level of detail which probably we shouldn't need to, because there's no board there to do it. So we're getting into levels of detail in relation to medical issues, in relation to health issues, and also in relation to spend issues on other committees, because of the fact that there's no board there. There's a vacuum. And we possibly are not being consistent in targeting some of the main issues to the level we should because of the detail we're having to get into. So I think the new board, the new chair designate, can set a new tone as regards making sure that the issues that need to be dealt with at that level need to be dealt with and are dealt with, and the issues that need to be dealt with in here at the highest macro level will be dealt with in here as well. As I said, the board must be inclusive. It must have a cross-section society with different skills, and also the patient advocates cross-reference of a society as well. I think also it's important that the new board fits into the whole sláinte care strategy. Obviously, some work has been gone on there in relation to the programme office being established, the advisory group, etc., etc. But I think it's important that, because of the fact we're now setting this up, that it's not just going to be set up and think it's going to act in some way like other boards. There is a strategy here in place that is the only show in town, that is across politics, and any Minister for Health, in my view, should slip into the slipstream of this because it is quite it's a strategy that's been adopted by the majority, overwhelming majority in this House. But it's important that the new board actually understands that while they are accountable to the Minister, while the chair designate is accountable to the Minister, there is also the requirement to be part of this larger trans-politics, trans-time strategy, because governments and ministers come and go. So I think that's critically important as well and needs to be fitted in. I want to say a few words about the whole issue of regional alignment, and this is a real bugbear of mine, and I know it's a bugbear of some others in this House as well. As part of the new structures, the whole alignment of community, of the CHOs and the hospital groups has to happen, but has to happen in an organised fashion. Because otherwise the accountability chain up and down gets broken, because people don't know who's aligned to who geographically. And all of us inside this House deal with, as I call it, the acute side and the non-acute PCCC side. I'm lucky enough in the Midwest. In the Midwest, they actually are aligned. It's the only place in the country, I'd say, where they're actually aligned. But I can imagine whereby, well, most of it is aligned. There's part of it in South Tipperary that isn't, but that's a different story. But it does cause real issues. So that needs to happen relatively quickly, Minister. And it needs to happen in tandem with the new regional boards being set up. And the new regional boards, in my opinion, are hugely important and hugely effective, potentially, because they will even get into a level of detail that obviously the national board won't be able to. So there are specific issues that can be dealt with then at regional level. There are specific issues which are a higher priority in the southeast than they are in the northwest, or vice versa, picking any regions in the country. So those regional boards are critically important, but they have to, I believe, happen following on from the alignment of the non-acute and the acute. One issue here is the role of politicians at a local level. I'm not saying we go back to the old, necessarily the health boards, but certainly when it came to accountability, common sense and a focus on the minds of regional health managers, I don't necessarily think they did that bad a job. So while not going back to that whole structure, I do think we need some format which isn't just the platitudes that happen in many regions at the moment, or a couple of times a year there's a meeting and we're given presentations, etc. Not necessarily me. I think and get a lot of information from our regional managers. But the point being, in general, politicians, I think at the local level, there is to be a role there as well, because there are crossover issues in relation to issues that happen at local authority level, transport, environment, other issues that need to be taken on board. So I welcome this bill, Minister. I hope you'll take on board 2 or 3 of my comments there, which I think are progressive comments. We'll be supporting this bill. We'll look at potentially 1 or 2 amendments, not many. The HSE is obviously too bureaucratic, too large. I think what Scally said in his report, that it was difficult to see who under this configuration was actually representing the patient and the public interest. Hopefully, by the change in structures, with the new chairperson designate, with the new board, with the new CEO, with the new transparency, with the new open disclosure, with the new regional structures aligned and regional boards, that statement will become redundant. But I fear it will obviously take us a lot of time and concentration to be able to get to that point. Thank you.